I'm the interviewer, Abby Varens. I'm a student at Da Vinci Charter Academy. The date is November 20th, 2014. The interview is being conducted in Pleasanton, California. I'm interviewing Heather DiSilvio, a captain in the U.S. Army. She was born on March 16th, 1984. Okay. So I guess that covers where and when you were born. Who and where are your parents and what were their occupations?
So my parents are Robert and Maria DiSilvio, and they live in Washington State. And my father is in business, and so is my mother as well.
Okay. Who are or were your siblings? Names and genders. So
I have 3 sisters. They are scattered all over the globe. Jamie McFarland in Washington State, Danielle DeVore in the Netherlands, and Christine DiSilvio in Connecticut.
Okay. Did any of them serve in the military?
No.
Okay. What were you doing before you entered the service?
So I was a student.
Mm-hmm.
I went to high school and then did a year of community college before I went to West Point.
Okay.
And joined the service.
So can you tell us what made you want to go to West Point? I guess say that again for us.
Yeah. So I was a sophomore in high school when I realized that I wanted to join the service, and I had an uncle and a cousin who went to West Point, and I had always heard their stories growing up about their experiences and thought it was cool. And when I told my parents, when I was 15 years old, that I wanted to go to West Point, they kind of laughed at me and said, "Oh, you won't be able to handle being told what to do," and so that sort of drove me even more to want to go to the academy. So it was actually summer of my junior year that I visited my grandparents who live in Connecticut, and they took me to the campus, and I got to witness the reception day parade for the new cadets that were just entering the academy, and I thought it was just incredible. And from that day forward, I said, I'm going to go to West Point.
So there's no doubt. Yeah. All right, let's see. Was there any thoughts of, was it, I'm just going to West Point, or were you thinking, were you looking at other colleges or service academies? What was that?
So actually, I didn't consider the other service academies.
Mm-hmm.
I really wanted to join the Army.
Mm-hmm.
And initially, I wanted to join the Army and be a judge advocate general, so an Army lawyer. And again, I think because I had family that went through West Point, I just kind of had my heart and my mind set on going to that academy. So I did apply to a couple other colleges, civilian colleges, but those didn't matter to me.
Yeah. Do you recall when you got accepted or I'm sure.
Yeah, so I think it was December of 2001 that I got the acceptance letter.
Mm-hmm.
And it was such a great experience because there was actually a liaison who, so part of the admissions process for candidates, you have to interview with the sort of admissions liaisons that are located all over the country. And this particular liaison told me that because I didn't have good test scores, that I would never get into the academy directly, that I'd have to go through the prep school route. So when he brought this up, he actually brought this up in front of my parents at a candidate luncheon, and pulled my father aside and said, yeah, I think that Heather should consider just applying to the prep school because, her test scores aren't very good and she probably won't get in. And when he said it to me, I told him right to his face in front of my parents, I said, no, I'm going to get in. So I'm not going to apply to the prep school. And so when I got my acceptance letter, I was so excited. And then there was another event, candidate dinner event, and I brought the acceptance letter with me because it comes in this little green folder. And I brought it with me, and I went right up to him and I said, oh, I just want to show you something.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So it was a great victory for me. Yeah.
That's awesome. Do you recall your days back at the academy, like a day-to-day life, or? Yeah.
So, when your first year, everything is new and everything is so different from what you were used to in high school. Everything's very structured, and you don't have much flexibility in terms of being on time for things. You must be on time, and I think your first year is when you learn that if you are a minute late, life becomes a little bit harder for you. I think that the first year was just the growing pains of learning a new way of thinking and becoming part of this system. And but then after you get used to the structure and you get used to being on time, and it becomes very routine. And so I would say that after the initial growing pains, the rest of my time at the academy was just a really great experience. Yeah. So I still look back at my time there and reminisce, and sometimes wish I could go back. Yeah.
Is all the hazing, I don't know, we hear about the hazing and stuff. Is that true, or do you?
It's not hazing, it's developmental.
Oh, okay.
No, so, the academy has quite a long history, and, over time, the development of new cadets has changed a lot since, the early 1900s. So, by the time I went through the academy, there were a lot of changes to policies and things like that. So, things that you see in Hollywood, they don't happen there. There's a lot of oversight, overtraining to ensure that cadets aren't being hazed or abused in any way. So, for people who are becoming, inculcated by Army values and the Army way of life, it might seem really hard, or the upperclassmen seem mean because they're yelling at you and they're telling you to drop and do push-ups, and you can't look around, you have to look straight forward, you have to walk at a certain pace and keep your hands cupped, and when you're eating you have to look at the little crest on the top of your plate, you can't look around. Little things that are meant to just keep you focused and discipline you, but for people who aren't used to that structure, it might seem really hard, like they're being targeted, or it's unfair, or it's mean, but there's definitely a purpose for it. And once you sort of, once you leave the academy and you're in the Army and you deploy, you see what the benefit is of all those little things that were meant to just keep you focused and disciplined.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Did you receive any special training before you got deployed or anything like that?
Yeah, so I was an engineer officer assigned to an infantry brigade, and so pretty much the time that I was commissioned and assigned to my unit, there was a special program for lieutenants called Basic Officer Leadership Course. So I went through that program. It was 6 weeks of sort of a brush stroke of all tactical tasks that young officers should know. And then after that went to my officer basic course, which was specific to my specialty, which, like I said, was an engineer officer. So I learned about bridge construction, construction in general, demolitions, topography. Those were all sort of captured in my my time in my officer basic course. After that, I went to a leadership course called Sapper School, which was a 4-week course, 2 weeks spent learning about, rope tying and mountaineering and demolitions, also some tactics, and then 2 weeks were spent just in the field, conducting, sort of mock missions, and then after that, I got straight to my unit and went to Afghanistan. So, I feel fortunate because some people, they don't have that much time back-to-back training in a schoolhouse before they deploy. It is fortunate if you get to train with your unit before you deploy. So you sort of learn how other people that you work with do things. You get a good feel for each other, and you sort of build your internal standard operating procedures. But my brigade had over 4,000 soldiers in it, and I was sort of in the brain center of the unit and planned missions, planned training. But I also had a really special assignment for this deployment. I was selected to lead a program called Female Engagement Team, and it was a fairly new program for the Army, whereby female soldiers would integrate with combat arms units, go out on patrols, and engage with Afghan women and children, and also with Afghan men on women's issues. So in preparation for that deployment, since I was running the program, I had to structure the training for the soldiers. I interviewed, recruited, and selected the soldiers for the job, and fortunately I had already deployed to that same area of operation, so I already knew what to expect in terms of physically what the demands would be for those soldiers. I was in the unit for a while, so I knew generally how difficult it would be to integrate into combat arms units. So all male units, being the only 3 female soldiers in the unit. So I guess there really wasn't anything specifically in the schoolhouse that trained me for that, but sort of, a lot of things in the Army, you just pick it up as you go, and you create through experience the intuition, and you create the relationships with other people to sort of be able to plan effectively as an officer. And like I said, I built this program from scratch, and was able to successfully integrate female soldiers into combat units.
What kind of physical demands are you talking about?
For my soldiers?
Mm-hmm.
So, we were deployed to northeastern Afghanistan, which is sort of, we were along the Pakistan border. It was very mountainous terrain, and so our combat units were embedded really in the mountainous terrain in the countryside with nearby local villages, and many of them had to go on foot patrols because they had to go places that vehicles couldn't always reach. So since I had already seen the terrain, I knew that my soldiers had to be in the right condition to carry weight and keep up pace-wise with other soldiers through that type of terrain. So I focused the physical program on road marching with weight, running with weight, and a lot of strength and conditioning work. So pretty much the standards that I set for my soldiers were way above the regular standards for female soldiers set by, the regulations. But the intention always was so that they would not only exceed expectations, but be able to keep up with the men that they were serving with overseas.
Could you give more detail about the program you built? It seems like, I guess.
Sure. So the way that the program was structured, we had, like I said, it was a recruit, select, train, integrate. That's how, the program itself was structured. And so there was a series of recruiting soldiers from my entire brigade. So again, 4,000 plus soldiers, and about 10 to 15% of the unit was comprised of female soldiers. So the biggest challenge was, a lot of units didn't want to give up their soldiers that were really, really competent, really good. So that took a little bit of a fight to get them to be allowed to come try out. So there was about a month or two of a selection process, and the aspects of the selection process, there was a physical aspect, there was an personal aspect. So how did these soldiers, how did they do on teams? How did they do as a leader of a team? Do they have good communication skills, reading, writing, speaking skills? How well do they adapt to different environments? And because a very important function is to understand a different culture. So how adaptable, are these soldiers? So those were sort of the top things that I was evaluating. And so the selection process consisted of interviews. So that was a panel consisting of myself and then a few senior leaders that would interview soldiers one by one. And, we would set up a camera and just add a little bit of pressure to see how the soldier conducted herself with a little bit of stress in front of people that outrank her. So that was the first step, was the interview, and if they made it past the interview phase, then there were a series of physical gated events. So there's a Army physical fitness test, which consists of a 2-mile run, push-ups and sit-ups. So they had to not just pass, but perform at least over 220 points. So, over 70 points in each event. And then like I said, there was road marching. So the farthest road march conducted during this phase of the selection was about 8 to 10 miles, with a 35-pound rucksack and a dummy weapon. A lot of running events. Also, we were fortunate being located in Colorado Springs right next to the National Strength and Conditioning Association. So I was able to work out having the soldiers do a physical assessment at their facility. So they were able to keep the information from that they were able to collect on the conditioning of these soldiers. But essentially, they went through an assessment on their, speed, strength, agility. They did row event. They did a jump event. They did planks, and then some shuttle runs and a run dragging a sled. So just a bunch of different gated events to really determine what their where we were starting from. What's their baseline? Because all these soldiers came from different units. Some were medical soldiers, some were administrative soldiers, some were cooks, and so they all had a different background, all from different units, all had different levels of physical fitness. So, but I also wanted to assess what their level of motivation and drive was in a situation where it was physically intense, more intense than they'd ever experienced before. So some soldiers were removed from the selection process if they didn't really push themselves and do their very best during the assessment. So I wasn't as concerned with their actual score as I was with their effort. So that was the next phase of the selection. And then we had some group dynamic testing. So how well do these soldiers do in groups among themselves and then among the combat soldiers. So also fortunate being at Fort Carson, there's a special forces unit there. So I was able to align with them to do joint training. And so part of their mission is to train local nationals in countries all over the world. And so I was able to get them to train my FET soldiers on basic infantry tactics. So that was a good exercise in seeing how well these soldiers learn, how well they interact with one another, and how well they interact with the combat units. So through those events, through that selection process, that's how I selected the soldiers. Very long answer to a short question, sorry.
No. I think since we're talking about women in the military, what's that like?
So, when you, I guess, come from high school where it's a lot more 50-50, it's at first, it's really different being, in the 10 to 15 percentile. And like at West Point, sometimes I was the only female in my class. You just you get used to it. And then by the time you get to active duty, you're so used to always being around men that, at least in my case, I never really felt like I was different, unless somebody wanted to point out that, I was physiologically different. I always felt like I was kind of part of the team and there was no difference. I could do what they could do, kind of thing. So that was my experience. Not everybody has the same experience.
Do you think it was harder emotionally or physically? What's the...
Sure. I think that everybody is trainable physically. I didn't start off in the Army where I ended up. So I had to work really, really hard physically to be able to run just as fast as guys, to carry the same amount of weight, and be equally as proficient physically trained. So emotionally is something kind of different. And so I think what impacts your experience emotionally is how you're treated by your peer group. And so definitely, I was also in the Army at a time when, by the time I was leaving, that's when a lot of changes were happening. Where women were a lot more integrated, and younger soldiers just were used to working alongside female soldiers, so it wasn't weird. But when I started, even at the academy, that dynamic hadn't yet really taken effect. So, I had heard comments about, well, she can't do this or she can't do that. She can't carry this weight. Not just about me, but about other females. And yeah, for the most part, you just kind of blow it off and say whatever. What does he know? But there's still that just emotional impact of those words and that mentality. Again, the way that you're treated, even if nothing is directly said to you, it's the perception of what somebody thinks of you based upon how they treat you. So I think that is more difficult than physical, because physical you can train that. Anybody can get faster and stronger and shoot a gun better.
What was it like in Afghanistan? How long were you there?
So I did 2 9-month deployments in Afghanistan. So what was it like as a soldier? What was it like in terms of Afghans? Both, yeah. So my second deployment, I was able to interact much more with local people. Mm-hmm. My first deployment was learning more about our systems, our logistics, as an army. But the opportunity to interact with locals was hugely important. And our mission there, is very important for training Afghans to carry on the torch of what we're doing. And so sometimes when you're sort of on the front lines, you don't always keep in mind the big picture. But I would say that my experience in Afghanistan, it was hugely important to interact with local people on a day-to-day basis and understand their plight, understand the cultural challenges for women, the cultural challenges for men, the challenges of their environment, and the impact of the insurgency on their environment. And so how is Afghanistan is a really hard question to ask, because there's so much that you experience when you're over there as a soldier. And I think sometimes people don't realize it, when you hear about it, what's going on over there in the news, that soldiers really are meant to be war fighters, and they're also meant to be diplomats. So you have this huge spectrum of responsibility, and you're not necessarily trained on how to be a diplomat, how to be a mayor of a village, essentially, how to negotiate contracts for construction projects. But those are all things that you're sort of expected to do. And, I think that we all did the best we could under the circumstances. And I definitely believe that we did a lot of good things for the Afghans that were in our area of operations. So we helped build a lot of schools and roads, and also really helped to push the agenda for women in our area. So from my first deployment to my second deployment, I definitely saw a huge increase in women in business. So women business owners, women in the government. So there was a position called the Director of Women's Affairs that was created in Afghanistan. And in 2010, so that was kind of the back end of my first deployment, that's when really the program started to pick up some momentum. And then my second deployment in 2012 was when these women were in place. And just having that little bit of improvement to the condition for women, it was just really incredible to see that. And so again, my soldiers got to work with women in government, women in business, women in the security forces, and really learn what life was like for them and really try to help improve their condition.
What did they think of you guys being in their country?
So, it was kind of a full spectrum of how we were received. There's a lot of articles written about the third gender. And this concept is that Afghans don't view American female soldiers as men. They don't view them as women. They view them as this third gender. So something really important to understand about Afghan culture, particularly in the area we were assigned to or deployed to, is very, very conservative. So in a lot of places, men couldn't even look at a woman outside of their family because it was disrespectful. So I had, in my own experience, I met a police chief one time trying to help establish bringing female police officers to the academy to train alongside men, because the more and more female police officers were starting to integrate into the security forces. And so this the head of this academy, he couldn't look at me at all. He was not comfortable with it. Obviously he wasn't used to looking at women. So the whole time he had to look at the men that I was there with, and would, ask questions. I mean, I didn't speak enough Pashto, he didn't speak enough English, so we did work through a linguist, but at no point would he ever look at me or touch my hand, so to shake hands, which was also something that is quite cultural. Shaking hands is not really a social norm in Afghanistan, particularly among men and women. So he, while some Afghans did adapt that greeting gesture when interacting with soldiers, when it came to female soldiers, some just kind of resisted that. But for the most part, I do agree with this assessment of the third gender, because while, like I said, that sort of small percentage of men, they realize that we are not Afghan women, so we're obviously working alongside our male counterparts and for a specific purpose, and they sort of had to be compliant, and they were, no matter how uncomfortable they were. And then for the most part, like I said, most other men that we interacted with, so village elders or government officials or security force leaders, they were less hesitant to interact with us. And in a lot of cases, they felt more comfortable interacting with us versus our male counterparts. Maybe they thought we were less threatening. Maybe they just felt more comfortable talking to us. Maybe we just made them feel like we were more interested. We asked different types of questions. Women think differently from men, so there's a lot of reasons why potentially they felt more comfortable around us. But yeah, I think that concept of the third gender was really, I agree with it.
Cool. Were you ever personally on the battlefield? Or-
Yes. So really, the battlefield is kind of a broad, a broad term. Pretty much, I guess you could consider it any time that you leave the security of your operating base, you're on the battlefield. You're vulnerable to being attacked one way or another by gunfire, by artillery, by IEDs. So, there's really no clearly defined front lines. So, which is something I think really different from other conflicts in the past, and obviously experienced as well in Iraq. But no soldier who leaves the confines of their operating base is free of being targeted.
Were you ever targeted as you left?
So actually, fortunately, I was not on the patrols I was on. And a lot of my soldiers were. So it was kind of just luck. Yeah.
Did you witness or see any casualties or destruction of war, I guess?
Not directly. I still keep in touch with people I deployed with and consider them very dear friends to this day.
How did you deal with the emotional hardships?
So largely, one thing that's just awesome about the Army is that you always have somebody there for you. It's just an enormous support network, and especially when you're deployed, you just you can't be antisocial. It's impossible. You're around people all the time, and I think for me, it was helpful to always have somebody to talk to or work out with, or just be able to vent to. Also, I'm pretty religious, so having people to be in fellowship with was very helpful as well.
What was it like being religious and away from, I guess, normal? I don't know how to put it, but what was it like practicing your religion in somewhere where it must have been different? Or
So actually, one thing that's really great about the way the Army is structured is every unit has a chaplain. So, while you may not get to go to a service every Sunday or whatever day you practice your faith, the chaplain will rotate to your unit, and you can participate in a service at some point. So you are, at least during my deployments, there was never a time where I wasn't able to attend a service of some kind, or even just talk to a fellow soldier about God. I found that there were a lot of people that had a similar sort of faith background, and so we were able to just do unofficial, I guess, prayer and worship and fellowship. So
let's see. Did your service affect your faith at all?
No, and if anything, it made it stronger. Yeah. So I think everybody, a lot of people who deploy, they lose somebody they know or they love or are close with, and I think that some people, that could be a reason for some people to lose faith, but you sort of realize that that it happens, and you could have been doing everything right. You could have had the best intelligence in the world, and it happens. So I think it's difficult to deal with, but in the end, it's faith in God that gets you through the loss.
Yeah.
Yeah. So no, I wasn't shaken by it.
How were you able to keep in touch while you were in Afghanistan with your family and friends?
Yes. So fortunately, I mean, the first soldiers that were deployed to Afghanistan certainly didn't have the same level of connectivity as when I was there in 2009 and 2012. Definitely the connectivity has gotten better every year as operating bases have gotten better established. But my first deployment, I probably interacted with home maybe once a week. And then my second deployment, I had wireless internet in my room, and I could, send an email home every day. So the resources available get better the longer that we're there. Yeah.
What kind of things would you do, I guess, recreationally while you were on base or?
Work out. Yeah, that was like the best stress relief, and also kind of the best way to build camaraderie with other people. So one of the biggest workout programs for soldiers is CrossFit. So, on my operating base, we had a great gym with a lot of good CrossFit equipment. And I would either just do a workout by myself or work out with a group of people. And if I had to categorize what I did for like the majority of my free time, it would be like something in the gym. Something physical.
I imagine after all that physical activity you get hungry. What was the food like?
So, the dining facility food, you have to kind of just accept off the top that it's all frozen food. It had to be transported into Afghanistan from somewhere. If you're super picky, it probably would be difficult to eat the mess hall food. But again, I went to West Point for 4 years, eating mess hall food for 4 years. So for me, eating food and dining facilities in Afghanistan, it wasn't bad. You can always find something that you can eat that's somewhat nutritious, like salad, fruits.
Did you ever get to experience like the cultural food?
Yeah, Afghan food, especially in the region that I was in, is very tasty. A lot of rice, a lot of meats, meat dishes and bread. So I found it very tasty, actually. Yeah.
When you were, I guess, first deployed and then deployed again, did you feel like a culture shock coming from one country to another, sort of drastic?
Like going home?
Yeah, or going there and then coming home, or?
Yeah, so, you do. You feel the change very much. 9 months doesn't seem like that long, but when you are sort of living a certain lifestyle day to day for 9 months, when you leave your operating base and you're in a tactical vehicle and you're putting gear on to go out and you're going like 40 miles an hour everywhere. This is just little examples. When you come home, for me, getting on a freeway was terrifying. And I don't think I started going like the actual speed limit for about like 3 or 4 months. Because going like 55 miles an hour was just too fast. I was not comfortable with it. But other than those little examples, I think it is, it's just a shift, a huge shift mentally. You're super grateful to be home and safe, but the extent of your experiences abroad, and seeing the different way of life, it does have sort of an impact when you get home.
Do you feel changed, like, coming home?
Yeah, I would say so. And if anything, just also super grateful that, about our way of life, what privileges we have, and so, yeah, I would say that.
How did your family and friends receive you when you came home?
So, yeah, everybody is so excited to see you, see you home safe and sound. And, one of the best feelings is when you get off the plane or get off the bus really, and you sort of march into a big gymnasium, and there is just stands filled with family members who are cheering and holding up signs and crying, and children screaming, enjoy to see their parent, and so it's such a good feeling.